Fraser's story is incredible. When it was shown to me, I was just astonished. I had heard of him before, and it's no surprise really. In terms of his experience, at the grand old age of, are you still 24?
25.
You've turned 25 now. It makes me feel old, but in terms of his age at 25, he's already been in production for 10 years. Is that correct? From the grandma's kitchen to mass production now. We've been talking and sharing some of the numbers in terms of jars of jam that are produced now, which is just frightening. Fraser's story is incredible. It says on here, Fraser Doherty MBE, to gain that award at such a tender age is an achievement in itself, and you don't get that for nothing. So what he has achieved is, well, I'll let him tell you that. But I've got to tell you this, if you don't know already, there has been a TV programme, a TV soap, made on Fraser's story in Japan, which is incredible. So I think we're all looking forward to tonight in terms of what we're going to see. I did promise to Fraser that I would move across to this and forgot as I stood up, but we're now all set. So Fraser, a really warm welcome from Leeds Beckett University and everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Fraser Doherty. I'm 25 years old. I come from Edinburgh, and I'm the founder of a jam company called SuperJam. And I was very kindly invited along this evening to share my story with you. And that's the story of how I learned my grandmother's secret jam recipe at the age of 14, and over the past 9 or 10 years have turned her recipes into a company that has since sold millions of jars of jam through thousands of supermarkets around the world. I guess you could say that my adventures as an entrepreneur began at an unusually young age. And in fact, ever since I was a little boy, I was involved in coming up with ideas to try and start my own business. And probably the most harebrained story of all came from when I was about 10. And I visited a chicken farm with my childhood friend. And we convinced the farmer to give us a box of eggs, which we took home to my mum and dad and explained that we'd had this great business idea, that we would keep the eggs warm so they would hatch, and we would start our own chicken farm in the back garden. And as I'm sure you can imagine, my parents were delighted by this business idea of having chickens running around the house, but they let us give it a shot, not really expecting that 2 10-year-old boys could find a way of hatching eggs. And so we put the box of eggs on top of the Sky TV box under the telly. It was kind of warm. And amazingly, a few weeks later, 4 of these eggs hatched into little chickens. And I mean, the poor things, they probably thought that Jeremy Kyle was their mum, you know, but we raised them in the house and we gave them names. And soon we put them out into the back garden and they started laying eggs, and we sold the eggs to the neighbours. And so that was my first ever little business at the age of 10. Unfortunately though, my career as a chicken farmer was sadly cut short one afternoon when the local fox decided to eat my chickens for dinner. And as tragic and upsetting as that day was, it didn't put me off completely, and I continued to come up with more and more ideas to try and start my own business. And so one afternoon when I was 14 years old, I was visiting my grandmother, and she was making jam in her kitchen just in the same way as she had for as long as I can remember. And that's a picture of my grandmother there. She's the one in the middle. And I got really excited about it, and I asked my gran to teach me how to make jam. And we spent the afternoon making a few jars together. And the same day I ran around to the supermarket and I bought some fruit and made a few jars of my own. And before they'd even cooled down, I took them around the neighbours and asked the neighbours what they thought. And thankfully, the neighbours at least told me that they enjoyed these first few jars of jam that I had ever made, and asked if they could start buying it from me every couple of weeks. And so I was soon making deliveries door to door of a little plastic bucket all over the local area. After a while, the local newspaper heard about this story of a young guy taking his grand's jam recipes and making a little business out of them. And that's an article from page 3 of the Edinburgh Evening News from when I was about 15, which I guess probably just meant there wasn't really anything happening in Edinburgh that day for something like that to make it into the news. But following the excitement of being written about in the paper, I soon started working full-time on trying to turn my jam making hobby into my career. And so I soon found myself cooking jam all day, every day, in my parents' tiny little kitchen, cooking up to 1,000 jars of jam a week and selling them at farmers' markets all over Scotland. Soon I got to the point where my parents couldn't get into the kitchen to cook the dinner anymore, and I realised I was going to have to come up with some kind of big idea to move production into a factory. And so I started doing a lot of research, and I found out that unfortunately sales of jam have been falling for maybe 20 years, mostly because jam is very unhealthy. It's usually 70 or 80% sugar and contains a lot of additives. I guess when I looked at the other brands of jam on the supermarket shelves, I figured they were very traditional, they were kind of boring, nothing had changed for a very long time, and I just figured that maybe I could come up with a healthier and more modern and more fun brand of jam. And so hundreds of batches and lots of recipes later, in my parents' little kitchen, I came up with a way of making jam 100% from fruit, without adding any sugar or anything artificial. I soon had a few flavors that I thought tasted pretty nice, and probably quite naively decided I was going to try and sell them to the big supermarkets. And that was something that a teenager had never done before, but I got my big break, I guess, when I got a chance to pitch my idea to Waitrose at a Meet the Buyer Day. And Meet the Buyer Days I like to describe as the X factor of selling groceries to supermarkets. And hundreds of people show up and stand in a queue holding their homemade cakes and soups and sauces, and everybody gets 10 minutes to pitch their idea. In my case, to the senior jam buyer of Waitrose. And he said it was a great idea. He said it was a lot of fun to see this kid turning up in my dad's suit, probably 2 sizes too big for me. My dad waiting in the car outside. But he explained there was a long way to go until I would ever have a product I could sell to a supermarket. I'd have to set up production in a factory and offer them a good price. I'd have to get labels designed that explained to people why they should buy my products, and I'd have to do a bit more work on my recipes before he'd be happy. But he promised that if I could do all of that, I'd be welcome to go back, maybe in a year's time, and he'd think about giving it a shot. So having met with Waitrose, it became my dream to one day see my products on their shelves. And I began by trying to create the SuperJam brand, the design of the labels and the website and everything else. And working with some designers, we figured that there was a link between SuperJam and Superman, or so we thought, and decided to create the brand around a comic book theme. And we had lots of fun writing jokes on the labels and on the lids. And we even spoke about making a superhero costume for me, the jam boy, to wear at the launch of the whole thing, which I was quite looking forward to. So we then had this set of labels that I thought looked pretty cool, and definitely my teenage friends at the time thought were very funny. And I began trying to solve the problem of how to produce hundreds of thousands of jars of jam to sell to the big supermarkets. And obviously at 17 years old, I wasn't going to be able to build my own jam factory. I was going to have to convince an existing jam company to work with me to make my recipes on a big scale. And so I traveled around the country from the tiny little islands in Scotland to the big cities in England, trying to find somebody with a jam factory who was willing to work with me. And as I'm sure you can imagine, most of these 100-year-old, very traditional family businesses were a bit skeptical of a 17-year-old kid turning up with no money and no experience and no idea how supermarkets worked and no idea how factories worked. But eventually I found one factory who had suffered from jam sales falling. They had some spare capacity, and they figured that maybe my idea was worth a shot. So a few months later, we figured out how to produce my recipes on a big scale, and I figured I was ready to start supplying Waitrose. Waitrose didn't agree. They explained to me the fact that SuperJam was made 100% from fruit and was all natural had all been completely lost in all the jokes and humour on the comic book labels. They said the factory I chose was way too expensive, and they didn't even like the flavours I'd made, so basically everything that I just spent a year working on had to be thrown in the bin, and I started all over again. So I travelled around a bit more and eventually convinced a new factory to work with me. The designers and I sat down and had a really good think about who we were trying to communicate with, who was going to buy this SuperJam. And I guess we clarified to ourselves that it wasn't kids and teenagers and my friends who might have thought the comic book idea was funny, but it'd be adults, and we'd have to communicate really simply that SuperJam was 100% fruit. And so having taken that new approach, I started to ask for advice from other companies that I thought had great packaging. And something I've been amazed by on my whole journey has been how happy and how willing other entrepreneurs and other companies have been to share what they've learned with me. And one company I got some advice from were called Method, and they make cleaning products in America. And I have to say it was the first and only time I ever had any interest in cleaning products. But they had taken a product that usually is so ugly and so badly designed that people don't even think about it. They just buy it and hide it away under the kitchen sink. But they created a product that in its own kind of way was beautiful, and because of their packaging, they were a huge success. Another brand that I got some ideas from was Dorset Cereals, and their packaging is really simple. Their products only have a few ingredients. They only use a couple of colors. And actually, by being so simple, they're able to stand out compared to the really noisy, colorful brands like Kellogg's Cocoa Pops beside them on the shelf. But the brand that I was most inspired by would be Innocent, and I wrote to those guys and asked for some advice, and they told me everything that they had learned about packaging design. And one thing they told me really helped, and that was that they figured that too many people try and say, here are 10 reasons why you should buy my product, and just list them all on the front of their packaging. But they said, if you could just come up with one good reason and just put all of your design and all of your energy into just trying to get that one good reason across, then maybe when someone spends a half a second in the supermarket looking at your packaging, they'll get that one message, and maybe if they get your message, they'll buy your product. And so having taken on board that advice, I realized all we had to do was get this message of 100% fruit across. And so we went through a few different designs that didn't really work at all, until eventually came up with one that hopefully does. And the packaging is really simple, very modern, very different to the traditional jam packaging I showed you at the start, and definitely very different to the comic book idea. And thankfully, after all of that, Waitrose agreed. And they launched SuperJam in all of their stores about 8 years ago now. And that, of course, meant we had to do the first production run in the factory. It was very exciting and quite an emotional day. I think we made something like 50,000 jars on the first day. And when SuperJam launched in Waitrose, there was this huge amount of media coverage. And I had no idea that this would happen, but I found myself being written about in newspapers and magazines and interviewed on TV. And I guess to try and take advantage of all of this media coverage, I went on a sort of rock and roll style tour around all the supermarkets. Handing out samples and telling people all about my gran and my story. And I think on the first day in one store in Edinburgh, where I come from, they sold more than 1,500 jars of SuperJam in one day. It was more jam than they would normally sell in a whole month. They'd never seen anything like it. And I think it got to the point where if anybody tried to go through the checkout without buying any SuperJam, the person working on the checkout would ask if they'd forgotten. And so then we had a big party when we sold the millionth jar. We launched in about 1,000 more stores. Got invited to have dinner with the Prime Minister at Downing Street, which was kind of cool. The products got put into the National Museum of Scotland as an example of an iconic Scottish brand, alongside Iron Brew and Baxter's Soup and Tonic's tea cakes. My story was used to advertise Orange and in a TV advert for a business card company called Moo. But we also did a TV show a few months ago, some of you might have seen on BBC. I went into like a failing kind of bakery chain and helped to give them some advice to turn things around. But probably the biggest promotion that we ever did was we gave away a free jar of SuperJam to every reader of the Sun newspaper. And I think about 5.5 million people read the Sun every day. It's the biggest newspaper in the English-speaking world. And so my proudest moment of all, as a Scottish person, was being able to share the very front page of the Sun with Scotland's national icon, Miss Susan Boyle. Another particular highlight of mine was making my debut on QVC, home TV shopping channel. And I go in there and tell the story, and people pick up their phones and buy jam through their TV. And this has been a surprising success. We've launched SuperJam in countries as far away from home as Australia, in countries as unusual as Russia. The country we've had the most success in has been South Korea, where we have a team of 5 people and 1 cat working very hard in an office in Seoul. Not really sure what I'm saying in this picture exactly. Something nice, I'm sure. And that's been a huge success. When we recently launched in Japan, my life story was made into a dramatized TV reenactment in which I was played by a small Indian boy. Something got lost in translation, but never mind. And I think I have to show you a little clip from this. It's the highlight of my entire career. So I guess we had some success in Japan. We also became the first jam company in the world to launch an iPhone app with recipes and videos and other bits and pieces. We've made a range of jams for children with kind of cute packaging and little projects for kids to do with the empty jars and without any seeds, because kids don't like seeds. We've also made a range of honeys, which you can probably guess is called Super Honey, which was inspired by an experience that I had as a kid where one of our neighbours had some beehives in his garden, and as a kid I thought they were fascinating, and he taught me all about how to keep bees, taught me about why bees were important for the environment, and I just figured that maybe that was an experience that other kids would like to have. And so we started installing beehives in community gardens around the UK. We teach kids how to keep bees, and then of course we sell the honey that the bees make. And for me, this idea of trying to run a business in a way that hopefully does more than just makes money, that hopefully does some good, was inspired when I read about an American ice cream company when I was a teenager called Ben & Jerry's. And I'm sure you've all tried their ice cream, but you might not know that Ben & Jerry were kind of hippies. They grew up in the 60s. They say that they became friends because they were the two fattest kids at school. They discovered, of course, that they both loved ice cream. They started making it, selling it, and the rest is history. They went on to sell billions of dollars worth of ice cream. But what I thought was cool about it wasn't really that they made a ton of money, but was that they at least tried to use their business to stand up for things they cared about. And so they used their packaging to protest about women's rights and environmental damage and rainforest destruction. And they were also pioneers of fair trade, the idea of trying to be responsible about where ingredients come from. And so about a year ago, I got to meet my hero, Jerry, and he ended up sending me to Uganda, where I got to live with a family who were growing vanilla to sell fair trade into the ice cream. And of course, they were very poor. They had no electricity, no running water. They couldn't afford to send all their kids to school. The most expensive thing they owned was this very sad cow tied up behind their house. And as well as being a very humbling experience, I got to meet some beekeepers who had made some very simple beehives out of leaves and wood, and they made, unfortunately, not very great honey that they didn't really make a lot of money from. But it got me working on a project to try and help beekeepers like the ones I met and families like the one I stayed with, how to make better beehives, to make better honey that ultimately will sell fair trade in the UK. And a company that I've been very inspired by kind of on my journey is another Scottish company called Brewdog. And they also started out at the same time as me at the same farmers market. They'd made some bottles of beer in their garage, and they have since become the fastest growing food and drink company in the UK. They've become an enormous success by making craft beers, high alcohol, high flavour beers. They've grown to millions and millions in sales. And part of their success has been down to doing lots of stunts. They made the highest alcohol strength beer in the world. I think it's like 36% alcohol, something like this. And then a German company makes one that's like 38%. So then this little Scottish company declared war on Germany, which was kind of sensitive, right? And then eventually they made one that was like 50% alcohol, something like this. And they sell it for £500 a bottle. They package it inside dead squirrels and stoats, kind of taxidermy. It's kind of gross. But because of that, they got a lot of publicity, real kind of cult following. And they capitalized on that cult following by selling shares in their company to the people who love their beer. And so they've got 16,000 shareholders, just ordinary folks who've bought a couple of shares just for fun in a brewery. And they've raised many tens of millions of pounds. And when they did that, they drove a tank through the city of London, all kinds of stuff. And so kind of inspired by their story, a couple of months ago we sold shares in SuperJam on a much smaller scale to about 400 people who love our brand. And that's helped us to raise enough money to kind of fuel the next chapter of the journey by designing some new packaging and launching some new products and launching in the US. Aside from growing SuperJam, we've also been involved in starting a couple of other projects, the most successful of which has been called Beer 52, which I started with a friend, and he is very passionate about craft beer. He went on a motorcycle road trip all around Europe and stopped at lots of little craft breweries and discovered that there are 12,000 little tiny breweries in the world, and they're all making incredible products with great stories. And basically, we created a club where we send out a box every month with 8 different beers inside, picked from all over the world, and we produced a little magazine about the beers that we're promoting. And that has grown to become the biggest craft beer club in the world. We've got about 16,000 people signed up in about a year, and we've worked with more than 100 breweries making some really great products. As part of that, we've invented a beer button, which we believe is solving a very, very important problem for society. Basically, people can put this little button on their fridge, and when they run out of beer, they just have to push the button, and then we get sent an SMS, and we send them a fresh box of beer, next day delivery. So we're pretty excited about that. I also have invested in a company making a beer-making robot, which kind of ties into all of this stuff. It's like a machine that people can put in their house, control with an app, make really great beer. But something I'm really excited about has been setting up a coffee business, and kind of similar to the beer company, it's a subscription business. We send very, very fresh coffee in the post in an envelope, next day delivery. And I guess coffee is something that should definitely be eaten fresh. Shouldn't have been sat on a supermarket shelf for months and months. And as part of this, we went to Colombia about 2 weeks ago, and we went there to try and source our own coffee and visited this guy who was a coffee expert. He tastes about 600 cups of coffee a day. And then I kind of met this guy, and he's buzzing. And I said to him as a joke, I said, like, what do you drink in your breaks between tasting coffee? He's all coffee. He drinks 16 more cups of coffee on his breaks. So this guy's full of energy, full of coffee. He gets about 2 hours sleep a night, and when he's awake, he's thinking about coffee. And so with him, we tasted about 100 of some of the best coffees in the world. We discovered one that we particularly loved, and so we tracked down the farmers. They were about 2 flights up into the Andes. They picked us up from the airport, drive up this dirt road for about 8 hours up to their village, which was this beautiful little place underneath a volcano, so the soil was very, very fertile, perfect for coffee, about 2,000 meters above sea level, and some of the best coffee in the world. And as part of that process, we kind of met some of the people in the village, about 1,200 people who were all relying on coffee for their livelihoods, and we took some great photography to help promote the coffee that we're going to buy from there. And then in the end, we decided to some of the farmers that we stayed with, they were very excited to see us. The region had previously had a lot of problems with the cocaine business, so we were some of the first international coffee buyers to ever kind of go and visit their village. So for the families involved, it was really exciting that people had kind of finally, it was safe enough for people to come and visit. And so in the end, we decided to buy next year's harvest from this family, which will hopefully first of many families that we can help to support through envelope. I guess SuperJam has gratefully received a number of awards along the way, and I'm not telling you about them to boast by any means, but one that I'm most proud of was called the Global Student Entrepreneur of the Year Award, and that was a competition where about 700 kids from all around the world went to America and did a pitch about their business to a panel of judges. And most of the other kids in the competition were running .com businesses, software companies, iPhone apps, and I was there selling jam, and amazingly won the awards. And I got to meet some other kids who had started their own businesses, and for me that was very inspiring. But I guess a kind of a lesson in that story, if you like, would be that a good idea doesn't necessarily have to be high-tech. A lot of great ideas are, but a good idea definitely doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. And I like to say that it's possible to make something extraordinary out of something as ordinary as jam. And so I guess from the point of view of sales and media coverage and even winning a few awards, it's all been quite an adventure and I guess something of a success. And that's all fine and well, but something I'm very excited about and ambitious for has been setting up a charity. And to give a bit of background, when my grandmother originally made jam, she would make jam and scones and cakes, and she'd visit all the elderly people in her area who were maybe living on their own or in care homes, and she would drag my little brother and I with her at the weekends, and he'd play his guitar and I'd tell them stories, and I guess it was just something that my gran felt strongly about. And so I thought it would be nice to try and do something like that, but on a big scale. And so a couple of years ago we started running free tea parties in community centres, in care homes and hospitals, originally in Scotland, but we now have them all over the UK. We've had them in Scandinavia and Australia. We've even had some in America, although in America we don't call them tea parties. It kind of means something over there, right? And in the past year we've had more than 100 tea parties. The biggest ones have had maybe 600 people at them. So thousands of grands and granddads have come along and hopefully had a nice time. And I've got a little video coming up shortly to hopefully bring this to life. Some pictures.
You don't need a Mad Hatter or a Cheshire Cat to have a wonderful tea party, just plenty of jam and scones. Today's tea party at Edinburgh's Meadowbank Stadium was set up by Fraser Doherty, the young entrepreneur who transformed his grand secret jam recipe into a multi-million-pound SuperJam business.
My grandmother taught me how to make jam when I was 14, and that's what started SuperJam off. When my gran originally made jam, she would make jam and scones and cakes, take them to all the elderly people in her area who were living alone, and they were a little bit lonely, and nobody really visited them very much, and she would take my little brother and I with her at the weekends. And so I guess visiting and caring for the elderly was something that my gran felt very strongly about, and the tea party is an opportunity for me to give back to my gran's generation.
So what are you hoping that the tea party will achieve?
Well, the idea is very simple. A lot of the people who come along here live in care homes or sheltered housing, or they live alone, and the opportunity to make new friends and have a bit of fun on an afternoon is quite rare for them. And so this is an opportunity for them to just have a bit of fun, some jam, and get up and have a dance if they like.
It brings back very happy memories of when I was a youngster, teenager, dancing in the city here in Princess Street Gardens and Marine down at Portobello. I just love this. It's just wonderful and can't get enough.
And why do you think it's a good idea to let on to let all the older people come here this afternoon?
Some older people are on their own and they need some entertainment, and this is what is good for us. You know, it keeps us active, it keeps us moving, it keeps us meeting people.
That's the best idea. Thousands of elderly people have come along and had a fun afternoon and made new friends, and I've got a wall covered in letters from the guests who have come along and just told me how special it is. One gentleman told him that it made him feel like a person again.
I was hoping to get a scone myself, but I don't see any. They're all gone. Where's your secret stash?
We always bring more scones to each tea party, and every time we run out, I think everybody just enjoys the scones and jam, and sometimes they can eat up to 4 scones each.
Oh! Fraser had his first tea party last June. There have since been over 100 events, and the plan is to roll out on a regular basis across the country. The aim being not only to give the older generation a chance to go out and have some fun, but to interact with the younger generation. How am I doing, Walter?
Fine.
Should we try another turn?
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably the best part of running the tea parties is interacting with the elderly people and just hearing their stories. Some of the guests are over 100 years old, and they've lived through wars, they've lived through the invention of television, all sorts of things, and their stories are just incredible and often inspirational.
And has your gran been on from the tea parties? What does she think?
My grand's very excited about the tea parties. It's an issue that she feels very strongly about, and to be able to give back to her generation is really special to me. So I guess the big idea now for the tea parties has been to really open them up so that anybody anywhere can volunteer to set one up in their own community. And we have a website, and people can apply online to get some free jam, of course, but perhaps more importantly, some money so that they can hire a venue and hire some entertainment and put on a really nice afternoon. And by making it really easy for people to volunteer, hopefully means that we can have hundreds more tea parties in the future. And I guess to help pay for all of these tea parties, a year or so ago, my grandmother and I decided to share our jam making secrets with the world by publishing a cookbook all about how to make jam without adding sugar and how to make traditional puddings that have jam in them. And we've also written a book called Super Business, all about my story and everything I've learned along the way and the advice that other entrepreneurs have given me. And the books have gone on to sell something like 100,000 copies, which has raised a lot of money for the tea parties. They've gone on to be published in Korean and Chinese and Japanese. No idea what those say either exactly. My gran and I are very happy nonetheless. And I have, of course, brought copies of the books with me. If anyone would like to buy one afterwards, all the money goes to the tea parties. I guess that's kind of my story. And perhaps what my story shows is that something that can begin for anybody as a very simple idea in a kitchen or a bedroom or a garage or a garden shed, a bit of love and imagination and hard work can grow into something amazing. Can grow into something that changes your life. I know that SuperJam has certainly changed mine. It can grow into something that gives you a career and hopefully a chance to give something back to your community. I guess there's a number of people that I need to thank for making my story possible. Not least, of course, my grandmother for teaching me how to make jam in the first place and inspiring the work that we do with the elderly. She's thankfully unaware of her intellectual property rights. No, but she's very proud of everything that's happened, of course. My gran goes into Waitrose and makes sure all the labels are facing the front and turns the competitors around the wrong way. My parents for letting me cook jam in their kitchen for years on end. But probably the best help and support I had was from having a mentor, a guy called Kevin, who had started a successful business supplying supermarkets, and he was just willing to spend a little bit of time with me, teaching me lessons that he'd learned and telling me about mistakes that he had made. So I guess I would say to anybody, whether you're trying to start a business or do something else, just try and find someone who's been there, done it before, who can maybe be your mentor. And I guess the last people that I need to thank, my amazing adventure, are all of you for very kindly having me here today. It's been a real honor to have been invited to come and share my story. I believe we have plenty of time for questions, if there's anything anyone would like to ask. But other than that, thank you.
Has anyone got any questions they'd like to put to Fraser?
I've got one.
Yes.
Sure.
What I'd like to know, and I found quite exciting, is the bit where you first said where you got the eggs and you hatched them. The birth of your jam is the passion. You know when you put the eggs, and I want to know, as a child, of the thoughts that actually over time how the eggs hatch. There's an essence of that, of the hatch. So as you've grown up in your journey, it's give you something really positive, so the ideas could actually flourish.
Yeah, I think if
there's something about the way those eggs actually hatched for you, and your parents went along with the idea, and the support that you had.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's very true. I think I guess like a lot of the time you maybe come up with an idea, especially if you're a kid, and you say, "Mom, Dad, I've got this idea," and they'll probably most parents would say, "That's not going to work," and then you don't do it, and then you don't learn anything from it working or not working. But I guess my parents obviously didn't expect that the eggs were going to hatch, otherwise they would have put an end to it. But they let me try. So I think like, yeah, if you like, I think the most important thing in life is that you do try. You know, I think like you never know if your idea is going to work or not until you try. And that's a cliche, but it's true.
How did you find, two questions, how did you find your mentor? And secondly, how often did you have to raise funding? What was the sequence of any funding that you had to raise?
Yeah, two really important questions. So in the case of my mentor, you know, like I was 15, 16, and I started asking, my parents were very supportive of everything I was doing, but they'd never started a business before. And so I was asking them questions that, as much as they would have loved to know the answer, they didn't know what margins does a supermarket expect or something like that. So then they started asking the neighbours, like, does anybody know an entrepreneur? And then one of the neighbours says, I work for this guy, I think he's an entrepreneur. And then we call this guy Kevin, and he finds the whole thing funny. Like when he was a little boy, he was selling things door to door, so he said, sure, I'll meet this kid for a cup of coffee and give him some advice. And then he, you know, we met up 2 or 3 times, and he just sort of was able to tell me stuff that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to find out, perhaps. And something I found was that, you know, if you ask people for help, they're happy to give it to you. Like, it's, generally, if there's a company that inspires you or somebody who has done something similar to what you want to do, like, don't be afraid of asking them for help. And then in terms of raising money, like similarly, I think a lot of the time people are terrified of starting the business because they think, oh my God, it's going to cost so much money. I don't have any money. My parents don't have any money. I can't borrow any money, whatever. But actually, I literally made like 6 jars of jam, sold them, and made 12, and then 20, and step by step kind of grew organically like that. And then when it came to moving into a factory, at 17, I couldn't borrow money from a bank. Like you could, probably an investor might not have taken that concept seriously at that point. But I was able to pitch the idea to the supermarket first, and they said, it's a great idea, yeah, if you can make it, we'll buy it. And then having their backing, I was able to go to the manufacturer and say, like, I don't have the money to make it, but Waitrose want to buy it, so perhaps you could help finance that. And so the manufacturer were happy to give me enough credit to get the first production off the ground. So sometimes there's like creative ways that you could raise money for your idea. And if you don't have access to money or you don't have money yourself, like, don't worry. If your idea is something that people want to buy, someone will finance it somehow.
Hi, how did you deal with any criticisms that you had along the way, especially from Waitrose originally, and then how did you motivate yourself to keep going and achieve what you wanted to?
Yeah, I think it's perhaps the most important question is like, how do you motivate yourself when things aren't working out? And definitely like the point where, because I think like the hardest thing about anything in life is like motivating yourself to try in the first place, or try when everybody says it's not going to work and whatever else. And in my case, the day where Waitrose said no, that was a moment where like I'd put all of my love and whatever little money I had into this idea, and it was all wrong. Like I had to go in the bin and I had to start again. And that was a point where family and friends and everybody around me said, like, if we were in your shoes, Fraser, this is actually the day where we would quit. Like we would just do something else. It hasn't worked. Why don't you just try something else? And then I suppose I realised that sometimes family and friends are not the right people to ask for advice. Like definitely you need their support and you don't want to do something that they disagree with, but if you have an idea for business and you say to your family and friends, this is a good idea, they'll go, yeah, it's a great idea, you should do it. But they're never going to tell you that your idea stinks because they don't want to hurt your feelings. And then similarly, if they see you trying something and it's not working, they hate to see you get hurt, so they want to see you quit, really, because they don't like seeing you in pain of it all. So basically, don't listen too hard to family and friends, because they're not going to give you like objective advice about it, are they? They've got emotional ties to you. So the person to listen to is the customer. And like, that sounds a cheesy thing to say, but in my case, Waitrose said, you've done it all wrong, but somewhere in there is a good idea. Like maybe if you come back and try again, we will give it a shot. So if it's the other way around, where your family and friends are saying this is a great idea, but you're pitching it to customers and they're saying it's a terrible idea, then probably is a terrible idea, because the customer is ultimately the person you have to impress. Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you started your business, did you start completely by yourself? Obviously you had the recipe from your mother, but did you take any of your school friends with you? And did anybody kind of help you along the way? And as you progressed with your business, have you stayed with these people, or have you brought in new people?
Sure. Yeah, like I guess in the very beginning I did everything. Like I made every jar of jam, I put every label on, like sometimes delegated that to my little brother. And then I'd have a couple of the other kids from school employed, like selling door to door and that type of thing, but basically just on my own. And I have since met people who've started a business with a business partner, and I think perhaps had I met that person at the beginning, that would have been a lovely thing. But so you can do it on your own, or you can do it with a business partner, and there's pros and cons of both, I suppose. But I started the business on my own, and then as it grew, I was able to hire people who are much better than me at everything, to design products and do sales and everything else.
When you first started selling the jams to neighbours, did you need some sort of food hygiene certification to cook in your kitchen and sell it?
Yeah, that was like when I told my parents I was going to make this stuff and sell it, that was the first thing they thought, like, oh, we need to get permission. So you phone up the council, and they actually were very helpful. Like they came and they inspected the place, and luckily we didn't at that point have any chickens running around the house. So they said it was all clean and hygienic and fine. And then they gave some advice about what kind of information you have to put on the labels, and then they point you in the right direction to get, you know, insurance, like public liability. That type of thing.
Was the food labelling and stuff like that a hard process for you to do as you were so young?
Not really, actually. Like the product wasn't too complicated, so it depends what kind of thing you're making. Like if you're going to try and make like face cream and sell it to the public, then that's quite complicated, and you know, because you could harm people or something. But thankfully, the risk of something going wrong with jam or like baking or something like that is quite low. So it depends on the type of product that you're trying to sell. But if you are trying to sell a food product, talk to the environmental health department of the local council, and if you have them on your side from the beginning, that's much better than them coming to you later on down the line.
So how serious did they take you being at such a young age? Was it hard for you?
People like the council, like they'll happily give advice to anybody. You know, it's not up to them to sort of judge if your idea is a good one or not. So yeah, generally they'll be happy to help.
At the back.
Yeah, on the factory.
Sure.
Yeah. So what was the agreement on the factory before you start production? And what's the status between you and the factory now?
Yeah, so the factory, they're like a 130-year-old, like third or fourth generation jam company. So like quite, you know, they know what they're doing. And so I met them, and they were very excited that somebody was coming and trying to like do something new in jam, I suppose, after they'd been in it for 100 years. And they were like the type of people that you shake hands on something and it's a deal, and you trust each other, and you know, I find that very refreshing, and we still work together now. Like I feel very loyal to them because they believed in my idea in the beginning, and it wouldn't have been possible had they not. So sometimes people like maybe what you're wondering is, are they going to steal the recipe or something like that? Like sometimes people wonder about that, and I guess I sometimes come to an event like this and meet somebody afterwards, and they say, I've got an idea for business, and I say, oh, what's your idea? And they go, I'm not going to tell you, you might steal it. And like I always think that's upside down. Like I think if you have an idea, tell anybody who will listen, because you never know who's the person that you meet, and you tell them your idea and say, oh, my brother, he works for this company, they might be interested in it, or whatever. Really, there are so many ideas in the world, like everybody has plenty of ideas that people aren't really that interested in stealing yours, I suppose, is what I came to realise, is that factories don't want ideas, they just want to make the same thing every day, so they're not really interested in coming up with ideas or stealing other people's ideas. And the most important thing you can do is like build a brand and try and convince that factory that you are the person that's going to make this happen, and that by the two of you working together as a team, it's going to go further than if they took the idea and did it on their own.
Fraser, can I ask, I mean, from actually producing within the UK to trading abroad, and a vast number of countries that you trade in, how did you move to that, and how did you actually attack the market?
I guess like in most of the times when we've launched in another country, it's literally just been a distributor or a supermarket has got in touch and said, like, I saw your products in Waitrose, or I read some publicity about it, can we try it over here? So I'm always very open-minded to people just coming, and like in Korea, the guy, he literally just kind of like read the book in Korean, and he said, I want to sell SuperJam in Korea, and emailed me and said, can I buy a few hundred jars? And I said, sure. He buys a few thousand, and then tens of thousands, and then now they've got a whole company doing it. So yeah, I guess there's no. I think if you're trying to sell something in another country, like try and find somebody there who you can trust, and you can sort of hand your baby to them and know that they're going to represent your brand in the right way. Like I could never go there and speak Korean to people and do it in my own kind of way. You have to find someone you can trust.
Up at the back.
Yep.
Oh, hi Fraser, that was inspiring. Especially the story of how you go from jam to beer to coffee, and how it becomes more and more addictive. So in a world of sharing, are you going to move into food, or are you going to stick with it? You know, what other complementary products do you see?
I guess like.
I just want to know where to buy shares.
Yeah. I think like the whole idea of like craft food and drink is like a huge trend. So craft beer has been a big trend for like the past 5 years. So like some of the fastest growing food and drink companies in the UK have been craft breweries. I think the next step of that is like craft coffee. Like coffee's been around for a long time, but now people are starting to realise that coffee is just like wine, just like chocolate, where every different region is totally different. Every roaster can make a totally different product, and as soon as you kind of start tasting these specialty coffees, you go, wow, like, I can't believe we were sold that Starbucks stuff before. It's a totally different thing.
Have you watched the film about coffee?
Which one? I don't know.
I'll send
Yeah,
you
that'd be great.
the link to a film about coffee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But yeah, I think like this kind of craft, it's like craft alcohol, craft chocolate, all of these types of things, that really excites me. Because I think, I don't know, like, you just look at Tesco's share price over the past couple of years, and that says something about what the kind of psyche of consumers is now, that we don't want to, we've kind of realised that a lot of that stuff wasn't really very true, that they were buying a £2 chicken, and actually were we really getting good value for money, that kind of thing. So that's something about that stuff.
Can I ask one more question? So, when does, have you ever thought that sometimes, and I don't want to be negative because I'm a positive person, but when does craft become so massified that it loses the craft? Or your soul, because it is you're not selling your soul, but it's you, it's that story, it's that thing that comes.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think the way I think about it is like, it's like holy cows, like in India. It's like if you've been there, they've got cows like walking in the middle of the road, like walking into the bank, wherever they want to go, no one will ever touch them. And so I think in a company, you have to realise what are your holy cows, like what are the things that, no matter how big we become, we'll never change these things. So like for SuperJam, maybe that's that it's 100% fruit. So even if it was a big, like sometimes it comes up at the factory, like, why don't we put sugar in this again? It's kind of like, you have to figure out what are the things that you'll never compromise on. And then it doesn't matter how big you are, like it doesn't matter if you're making 10 of them or 1,000 of them, if you're making them with integrity, then it's the same thing. Yeah.
Have you got like an agency or a team or someone in-house that actively like promotes your brand through media, or has it just come across by entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so like with SuperJam, like the best way of promoting the brand has literally just been, because it's a food product and we're selling it in supermarkets, I think the best place to spend your marketing budget is as close to the checkout as possible. By the time people get to the supermarket, they've forgotten all about any kind of advertising you've seen or whatever. So if you can actually have somebody standing in the supermarket in front of the tills handing out samples of jam, then that's the point. You're most likely to get them to change from Hartley's to SuperJam. So we just put all the money into employing people physically in the stores, handing out samples. And then with the beer company and coffee, because we don't have a supermarket getting in the way of us and the customer, we do lots of like inserts in magazines or like Google and Facebook advertising and kind of more traditional.
You do that with yourselves?
We use agencies for a couple of different things, and then we have like a data guy in house who's like super geek who kind of analyzes everything. Yeah, that stuff is very analytical.
And how many people in your company now?
It's 15 at the moment.
And are you based in Scotland or?
Some of them are in Scotland, some are in London, and then some are working remotely. And then the factory's in Manchester.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
I guess that's the sort of thing people ask. I guess sometimes I sort of have a different way of thinking about it. I don't like to think. Sometimes people say, right, get a piece of paper and draw a picture of your perfect life, where you're trying to go. And I don't really buy that. I think it's much more important to just be open-minded. Like, you never know, you're going to meet somebody tomorrow and they're going to say something to you that changes your mind or gives you an opportunity. And if it wasn't on your piece of paper, you might not take it. So I kind of prefer to just try to react well to the opportunities that come up. And it doesn't really answer your question, but it's like a different way of thinking about it. But I definitely want the business to grow and sell in America and stuff.
Has anyone tried to buy you out?
Sort of, but I've got a lot more that I want to do with the business before we do anything like that. And I love, I can't really imagine doing anything else with my life than this. I find it a huge amount of fun, and I see like a lot more that we could do.
Hi, I found it really inspiring. Thank you. It's interesting that you started out with sort of looking for a healthy version of an unhealthy product, and now you're sort of heading into the artisan kind of thing. Is there any sort of prospect of, bringing healthier versions of other sort of typical staple parts of UK
Yeah. I guess.
I'm not really sure of any ideas.
Yeah, no, I feel like the health thing is.
My mum was diagnosed as diabetic not so long ago, so I'm thinking, right, I'm going to go and stock up on SuperJam then.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, yeah, like the health, maybe like when I started SuperJam, sort of healthier foods was like kind of like a new thing, I suppose. And so that was like a lot of the companies that were starting at that time, like Dorset and Innocent, and you know, it was all about trying to say like all the stuff that we're buying in supermarkets is full of rubbish, and we could make healthier versions. But then I think a lot of that stuff has happened now, so you can get pretty. I guess like a lot of mainstream products have become a lot healthier.
The Jamie Oliver effect.
Yeah, and then I think a big trend is that like things are. You used to be able to build a successful company by I guess like winning a race to the middle, so like Heinz or Kellogg's or Tesco. Like these are companies that appeal to almost everybody. But I think like that's definitely changed. Like I think if you look at the fastest growing companies in Britain now, they're at either end of the price spectrum. So it's like Primark, Poundland, they're like Ryanair, they're like fastest growing companies in Britain. And then at the other end is like luxury brands, like partly because income is becoming more and more unequal and this type of thing. But like Waitrose and Aldi are the two fastest growing supermarkets. So I think that says something about when you come up with an idea, you should not be in the middle. You should either be the cheapest or the most expensive. I think that's an important trend.
Okay.
Cool.
Right,
On
well,
that
a
random
lot
note.
of questions there, and I think, well, what we've heard tonight, this evening, is really evidence that, I guess, I say a simple idea, it wouldn't be simple to me to make jam, but in terms of getting hold of an idea and having the drive and the determination to see that through, even in the face of failure at times, and to keep going. I mean, a great question of, you know, how do you deal with when you get that no? And I think that's something that we all have to face to at different times, whether we are students studying, whether we are business people trying to get new contracts, whatever it is, there are times when it doesn't work. And that determination to keep going, I think, is an example to all. I've certainly taken a lot from tonight. I dare say I might be buying one of the books and trying jam making in the future. But please join me in showing your appreciation for Fraser.